Playmates' 90s Star Trek line was pretty diverse, and none more so than their main line of 4.5-inch action figures. This line took in pretty much every character you could think of from the Star Trek universe at the time, and even threw in some starships and playsets for good measure. And during this time, they also experimented with multi-figure gift sets. But one of the more unusual releases was this Corbomite Manuever set. Playmates were walking a pretty thin line at the time. They were trying to appeal to the mass child audience with their action figures, but at the same time also appeal to the adult collector. And this is one of those sets that firmly falls into the latter category, because this isn't a set that really would appeal to many young children at the time. And I'll expand on that a bit more as we look at these figures in turn. But for now, let's start off by looking at the packaging. This is quite a nice, big, chunky packaging. It's relatively slim, so it's easy to store, but it is quite long, and they've done a really nice job with the art design. We can see that starfield in the background, we can see the Enterprise there whizzing along at top speed, and of course we have the planet in the background as well. So this looks really colourful, it's really attractive, and it's very easy to put on display. The reverse is a little more bland. It just has the starfield in the background. There's bio about the episode, a brief synopsis there, which is pretty cool to see. There's other figure sets that we can see that were released as part of this wave, which look a bit more interesting. And then, of course, on the right hand side, we have an image of the figures and the diorama that this set comes with. Now, I do think that the saving grace of this set is the diorama itself, which is essentially the card inlay. When you take that out, you can see this wonderful presentation background there. You can see it's actually lifted onto a plinth, so again, that's been moulded in. And then there is this separate plastic piece for the figures to stand on. There are pegs on that. Now, the idea is that you essentially disassemble this cardboard set as it is currently, and you can mould it into more of a curve that you can see would fit into the slot on that plinth there. And it would have that sort of 3D effect generated by that curve. Now, there are 3 figures included in the set. Of course, we have the Balok puppet, Balok himself, and then, of course, Captain Kirk. Now, as you can see, when you put these 3 figures in front of the diorama, this is quite effective and very attractive to fans. It's quite accurately recreating the scene from the Corbomite Manuever. It looks pretty faithful to what we see on screen. They've done a really nice job of bringing this to life in toy form. So whilst I think that adult collectors would be very happy with this set, children probably not so much. And why is that? Well, it's because of the figures themselves. Let's start off by looking at the puppet. This is a really nice sculpt. They've done a really accurate job of bringing what we see on screen to life. It is screen accurate, it looks very nicely painted, very nicely sculpted. It's a pretty nice figure. The only problem is that it has absolutely 0 moving parts. Now, for an adult collector who wants to have a nice display and wants to faithfully recreate the scene from that episode, this is absolutely fine. But for a child, this is a little bit disappointing. It's amusing for a few moments perhaps because it looks pretty cool, it's an alien, but beyond serving as a paperweight, there's very little a kid can do with this toy. And then we have Balok himself, who once again is just a single piece. There are no moving parts to this figure at all. So from a kid's perspective, 2 out of 3 of these figures in this set are pretty dull. The adult collector, on the other hand, is likely to be quite pleased with this figure because, again, it's a pretty decent sculpt with a nice paint job. Now, it's fairly simplistic for its time, and again, it is aimed at that child market. However, I think they've done a pretty decent job. So then we have Captain Kirk, and one of the things I really like about this version of Captain Kirk is that they actually bothered to paint in his little belt that we see in some of the first season episodes, which is pretty cool. The figure is bright and colourful, and thankfully isn't twisted into any strange shapes or positions as some of the early releases from Playmates often could be. The sculpting and the likeness is actually pretty decent. Again, we have to take this in the context of the time and the scale and the audience it was produced for, keeping that in mind all the time, but I actually think this is a pretty effective job. My only real criticism would be that they have actually painted in the sculpted lines on his forehead, which with a brown paint, which looks a little strange. But thankfully, he does have plenty of articulation. He has that swivel ahead, allows his head to spin right the way around. He's got the swivel at the shoulder, allowing the arms to lift up and down. There's actually a bicep swivel as well, giving a much greater range of motion there, which is fantastic. And then this is complemented by a single joint at the elbow. So there's plenty going on here in the upper body, which is great. He's then got a swivel at the waist, allowing the figure to turn from side to side. And then he also has a swivel at the thigh. Now, sadly, it is that diagonal cut, which I really not a big fan of that they used on these figures, which is a real shame because it does limit what you can do with them. But he does also have a single joint at the knee as well. So then, it's hard to deny that this set would be pretty disappointing from a child's point of view, because there's just not an awful lot of playability here. There's no action features in the set itself. Unless you happen to be a big fan of this episode as a child, it's probably not going to have the impact that it would have on an adult collector having the Balok puppet, for example. And let's be honest, at the end of the day, if you wanted the Captain Kirk figure, which from a child's point of view is the standout one in this set, then you could probably pick him up single-carded. From the adult collector's point of view, though, I do think this is actually a pretty nice set. It's kind of surprising just how well they've actually rendered this diorama, and I think that makes it very effective. And all the things that work against it from a child point of view, those non-moving pieces, actually work much better for the adult audience, because this makes it a lot more displayable, it makes it a lot more authentic. In fact, the weak link, probably from an adult perspective, is the Captain Kirk, because he does look a lot more toyetic compared to the models that we see in this set. Ultimately, I have mixed feelings about this set. On the one hand, I do think it is very presentable, and I'm very glad to have it in the collection because there is something wonderfully unique, because it seems to incorporate two very disparate worlds in one set. You have the child toyetic world, and then you have the adult collector world, and somehow this set seems to incorporate both elements. It doesn't seem to quite please anyone, but at the same time, it does offer the sprinkling of magic from both worlds. I do think this is quite a nice collect for the adult collector now, more so than it would have been at the time. There's something about the hindsight element of the Playmates line that make this even more attractive as the years go by. There's a certain nostalgic element that makes this set a lot more fun now than it did at the time. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.